I recently moved into a house that has well water, and the hot water smells kind of like rotten eggs, especially at showers with all the steam. So what I'm going to try and do is replace this anode rod, which I already pulled this cover off, with this product called Corro Protec. It's an electrified anode that I think will never wear out. Whereas the other ones you're supposed to replace, I think, every 2 years or so. This water heater is 22 years old. The first thing you're supposed to do is turn off the power to your water heater and also the water supply. And I'm going to let the pressure out of the system. Probably good enough. Oh, it's also recommended to take some water out, although not all of it, because the weight can help hold it steady if you're using a wrench. So I'm gonna maybe a half bucket out. And you can kind of smell the rotten egg smell in there. Then you need to find the anode rod on your water heater. I had to kind of push away some of this foam insulation. It had clearly never been removed. The rods are typically 1 1/16, so you need to get a pretty big socket. I borrowed this giant cheater bar with a 1/2-inch drive at the end, and also this giant pipe. And I had no luck moving this at all. And going on YouTube, I saw a lot of bigger people, actually multiple bigger people, trying to loosen these and also failing. I also had a friend recommend to use this penetrating catalyst, and I let that sit for a few hours, tried again, let it sit overnight, tried again, nothing, no help at all. And also when I had my wife trying to help me, the only thing we accomplished was in rotating the entire water heater on its base, which started to stress the copper piping coming out of it. So that's when I decided to bail. So I went to my local Harbor Freight and got this $50 1/2-inch electric impact wrench and also a 27mm socket. I think you're supposed to get sockets specifically for impact. I think the other ones can shatter. So this isn't an 1 16", but I think that came out to 26.99. So we'll see if this works anyway. This was about $4. This thing is heavy. I used a marker to make a little line so I could see if this thing is actually rotating at all as I... All right, here we go. It's on there. Oh yeah, my mark is totally moved. Oh, and water's coming out. Oh. And that, I guess, is what's left of my my rod. So I'm gonna take the socket off. So this is what 22-year-old rod looks like. Some other people had said they had to cut it because it is kind of long. But mine is down to the original whatever steel core, so it's super flexible. So there is the sacrificial anode rod that has been completely sacrificed, it looks like. So that was really easy. So even though I emptied out some water, I think more water is coming down from the rest of the piping in my house. It keeps coming off the top here, so I'm gonna let a little bit more water out the bottom. And right now we're at the part of adding Teflon tape to the Corro Protec end. And it did not come with this, just FYI. So this thing, it's interesting, it's pretty short compared to most replacement rods, which is kind of nice if you've got a ceiling that's low. I don't really know how many passes to do. 3-ish. Put it in there and tighten it down. So it says to use a 31mm socket or a 1 3/16. I've actually got a 30, and I don't know if this is just because it's a little worn down, but it seems to fit. So that might work for you too. That guy in there. Tighten it down by hand. Said don't use too much force. Didn't say how much torque to use, but I guess if there's a leak, I'll tighten it some more. It's kind of nice that it actually sticks up outside of this top piece, so you could get a monkey wrench on it and not have to find a specialized socket after the fact if it did get rusted in there. Okay, then I'm supposed to install the black grounding connection to one of the tank cover screws. So it looks like I've got a screw here that's specifically for grounding.
That might be too big.
Let's see. Oh, just barely. Feels pretty snug. Then we're supposed to insert the ground, or I guess the positive side, to the end of the anode and press it firmly in place with pliers. Crimp it on there. So do that here. It feels pretty sturdy even without really crimping it. So one nice thing is that this cord is really long. I think I might be able to make it over to my power outlet without having to use an extension cord or run other power. It's, I don't know, 15 feet, something like that. So the instructions said something about looking for a green light, which I see there. The control light located on the rectifier of the Corro Protec system will automatically light up upon connection, thus providing the optimal protection for years to come. We shall see. Turn the power back on, cut the water back on, and we'll see if there's any water coming out up here after I get the pressure back on. I think it's okay. I also read that you could put hydrogen peroxide in your water heater to temporarily get rid of the bad smell and the bacteria, but this is only a temporary solution. And on the website for Corro Protec, it said that the smell would go away within 24 hours. So in the interest of science, I have not put any of this in here, and I'm just going to see if this thing alone can get rid of the smell. These are the instructions for my water heater. Anode rods should be removed and inspected annually, and when more than 6 inches of the core wire is exposed, it should be replaced. More than 6 inches and 22 years. So kind of impressive that this thing didn't have any problems for 22 years. We'll see how long it lasts. So, I don't know, 20 minutes later, I'm not smelling any rotten eggs at all. Kind of magical. When I first turned it on, a bunch of black water came out. I don't know if that was from the old rod getting disturbed or it's getting into the heater. So that's why it's dirty down there. And this brings me to the part of the video where I speculate on possible causes of this rotten egg smell in the water, the chemistry behind them, the purpose of an anode rod and how it works, all topics I'm terribly unqualified to talk about. So I'm pretty sure the smell comes from hydrogen sulfide gas, which ultimately results from having some sulfur in your water. And I've read that hydrogen sulfide gas is normally not present in enough quantity to pose health risks, but the gas can be corrosive to your plumbing and in my case can make you want to yak while you're trying to take a shower. I believe there are two things that can turn sulfur into the stinky gas: bacteria that eat the sulfur and create the gas, or sacrificial anode rods and water heaters that kick off hydrogen when they react with the water, which then combines with the sulfur to create the gas. I think that anode rods alone by themselves can create the gas even if you have zero bacteria, but I'm not 100% sure. My water heater was 22 years old, which means I effectively had no anode rod left. You can see what a new one is supposed to look like versus the skeleton remains of mine. So I think that means bacteria were the culprit in my water heater. Those bacteria were also not supposed to be dangerous from what I've read. If we go to the Corro Protec website, it says it can solve the problem regardless of whether it was caused by these bacteria or by reactions between an anode rod and your water. So down here it says that if it's bacteria, that the same current or electricity that it uses to prevent corrosion can kill the bacteria. I'm a little skeptical of this claim that the current will kill the bacteria. I mean, just because electricity is going through your water doesn't mean it's going through the bacteria or that there's even any potential difference across the bacteria that could kill them. So one other possible explanation, even though my anode rod was completely gone, maybe my water heater itself was starting to react and corrode and kicking off some hydrogen gas that then created the hydrogen sulfide gas. Something about putting in this Corro Protec rod completely solved my stinky water problem. I'm just not sure on the exact mechanism. By the way, all these tanks are glass lined to prevent corrosion. The problem with the glass lining is I think it's not always perfect, and that over years with the heating and expanding and then cooling and shrinking, there can be portions that aren't protected by this glass. So that's why you need these protective anode rods or some other mechanism. Okay, so how does a sacrificial anode rod actually protect your water heater? So a little chemistry background first. Turns out when you put two different metals together and then you stick them in a liquid like salt water, you actually form a battery. These metals want to react with liquid and stuff floating around in the liquid to form new compounds like rust or dissolve into the liquid. But most of these reactions actually require electrons. They either want to spit out electrons or consume electrons. So I think if you just put a random piece of metal in water, it's not going to react very much. But if you connect two pieces of metal together, and one of them wants electrons more for its reactions than the other, now you've created this circuit where one side can get the electrons it needs and the other side can dump the electrons it doesn't want for its reactions. And it turns out that the side that loses the electrons is the one that ends up corroding, since atoms that lose their electrons have a tendency to dissolve or form other compounds like rust. So if I go to the Wikipedia page on corrosion, there's actually a table that gives you some insight into how different metals will corrode and react with each other. So the farther apart two metals are on this table, the more of a reaction they will have, and the one that's on the low side is always the one that corrodes. So in the case of our water heater, you've got iron, which is part of the steel case, and copper. So the iron is the one that corrodes because it's lower down here. Interestingly, if you put sterling silver and regular stainless steel silverware in your dishwasher at the same time, it'll really corrode the stainless. And if you look at the very bottom of this table, you'll see magnesium. And this is why this is used as the sacrificial anode in your water heater. Because if you connect a magnesium part in here, it becomes the source of the electrons, and both the steel and the copper get protected because they get fed the electrons. So it sounds like only the lowest thing on the list actually gets corroded.
I highly recommend this video by Tyler DeWitt that explains this battery thing, which is called a galvanic cell. Also, the Wikipedia page on galvanic corrosion is great. I put links to all the stuff I'm going to talk about in the description. The larger topic here is electrochemistry, which I'm now an expert on after watching 6 YouTube videos, and seems to involve cases where chemical reactions either kick off or consume electrons. These sacrificial anodes, by the way, appear to be common in all kinds of places, like on bridges, on boats, underground piping, basically anywhere you want to prevent corrosion and you've got different kinds of metals connected to each other. And actually, even if you don't have different kinds of metals, like you just have one giant underground pipe, you can still have these potential differences because the chemistry of the soil and the oxygen in the soil can change along the length, so you still get these kind of battery-like electron loops. Okay, getting back to the rotten egg smell, if you search for rotten egg smell on Amazon, you'll see these zinc aluminum replacement anode rods. So this is in place of your standard magnesium one, and they claim that putting this in will get rid of your rotten egg smell. And I think the reason for this is that if you look at our galvanic series table here, you'll see that zinc is a little higher than magnesium. So I think that means it's a little bit less reactive than magnesium, and so maybe might not kick off as much hydrogen and therefore as much hydrogen sulfide gas in the end. Interestingly, they say that it's not recommended if you have a water softener. And I think that's because when you have a water softener, the water softener is pulling out calcium from the water and putting in salt, which makes it more conductive, which I think in the end means that you're going to still get as many reactions, even though this is a less reactive metal, because it's such a conducive environment for these reactions in salt water. So related to this, I found this other site that's talking about the best anode material for different types of water to protect your boat. Interestingly, they recommend magnesium only for fresh water, not for salt water. And I would have thought they would have recommended magnesium because it's a more reactive thing for more protection in the more corrosive saltwater environment, but I think they don't recommend it because this thing will get eaten up so fast that it won't last long enough. So that's where they recommend zinc instead of that. Okay, this gets us back to Corro Protec, which uses a totally different mechanism to prevent corrosion other than a sacrificial metal. It uses this thing called impressed current cathodic prevention, which if you look at the Wikipedia page on cathodic protection, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, you can see it here under impressed current systems. So my understanding for how this works is that you've got this natural battery where electrons are wanting to be pulled from the tank. So if you can put in power that kind of pushes the electrons the other direction, like pushing them into the tank, you can stop that natural battery and that corrosive reaction from happening. Only downside is this thing costs a lot more than your standard magnesium rods. Instead of $10 or $20, this is $140, at least when I bought it off Amazon. And you also got a constant electricity draw. However, that's only 1.2 watts, which is only $1 or $2 a year. So the end of this Corro Protec rod is titanium, which is very unreactive. So I guess this is partly why they can say it will last for 20 years. So there's no actual corrosion going on in the whole system if everything's working correctly. If you want to learn more about this whole concept of impressed current cathodic protection, I recommend this video by Marine Insight that talks about the theory, the chemistry, and just kind of how it's practically set up in ships. Okay, so about a month later, I still don't have a hint of sulfur smell in my hot water, but I do smell a little bit of it in 2 cold water faucets, and I probably didn't even notice these before because the hot water smell was so bad. I think this means I have some sulfur-eating bacteria in some of my plumbing somewhere, and I could probably fix that by shocking my well with chlorine. My hot water heater has also not exploded or leaked in any way, so that's good. But maybe I have a miracle heater because somehow it lasted 22 years without any anode protection and with a super salty water supply from a water softener. So overall, note that these water issues appear to be very complex, and there could be a million other causes for the smell, like actual sewage in your water, hydrogen sulfide in the water before it even gets to your well, iron-eating bacteria, and probably 10 other things. Some other helpful resources I found include this page from the Minnesota Department of Health, which has this nice flow chart to help you decide if it's in your well water, your plumbing, or your softener, or your heater. And they've got some recommendations based on where the source is. I also like this guide from the Texas Agricultural Extension Service all about this smell, which gives some pretty specific advice on how to shock your well with chlorine, like how much to put in and how long to let it sit, etc. These links, again, are in the description. All right, well, if anyone has made it to the end, I hope my trip down this rabbit hole at least helps shorten your trip a little bit. Good luck.